Imagine that each morning when you wake up, you're smiling and looking forward to your day, knowing that you're happy even while dealing with grief and loss. The Grief and Happiness podcast inspires, comforts, and supports you with each new episode. For more support, check out the Grief and Happiness Handbook and cards. I welcome you to listen to this podcast and discover endless possibilities for your life. Aloha. I have a fascinating guest today with a really different take on what we're doing with the Grief and Happiness organization. I just am thrilled with being able to talk to somebody who's such a pleasant, positive person. So welcome, Ashish. Did I say that right?
You did, Emily. It is so nice to be with you and with your listeners. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about you and what you're doing?
Absolutely. Emily, I grew up in India. I was born in India, and I was born to two parents who were real high achievers. My mom was a PhD in mathematics, a gold medalist in calculus. My father was a topper all throughout his works, and in his engineering degree, he did really well, and then he joined the Reserve Bank of India. And so I grew up right to these parents. We were in middle class, but we were like, achievement really mattered and studies was really important. There's often unwritten rules, right? I had the most loving parents. I love them. They just left actually yesterday back home to India. They were there with us for 4 weeks. But very early, I picked up this worldview that the only thing that is good is if it's perfect. And if you want to be perfect, you got to just work hard. And if you are, then you will be accepted, you'll be loved, and you can have whatever. That script really served me well for a large part of my life, Emily. I came to the US when I was 23. I had $5,000, which was a loan in my pocket and a return ticket. The next 8 years, I made partner at one of the leading consulting firms in the world, at McKinsey. I had a 25-year consulting career. And, I'd found myself at 43. So exactly 20 years after I landed on the shores, I found myself with, I have enough money. I have a lovely wife who I met. I have a beautiful son. I have great friends. My health is good. We were living in Boulder, which is magical and beautiful. My parents are great. Everything is done. Everything is good. I'm doing really well at work. Clients love me. Teams love me. So everything that you would pick up on all you need to be happy was checked. And yet I was waking up in anxiety every morning, not knowing why. That's what started my journey. So my journey was, thank God, which I only learned later, thank God, wasn't in pursuing happiness. Because if you look at the science of happiness, as somebody who does so much of this work, no, those who want happiness and pursue it are actually unhappier. So I wasn't actually searching for happiness. What I was searching in spiritual texts, in psychology, in neurosciences, in sociology, in philosophy, and through other teachers was what makes us suffer, what keeps us stuck in fear and anxiety, even though we have it all, right? And this me search problem became it's an open problem. Like, we are as a generation more prosperous, more connected, living longer, and can do things so much faster. But yet we are, as humanity, struggling with stress, anxiety, disengagement, loneliness, ill health, especially in our later years. It became kind of this thing, right? And so that's really what started my journey. And the book I actually wrote was not Hardwired for Happiness. The book I wrote, which came from all my research, 450 plus books, thousands of hours of watching videos, studying with spiritual teachers, psychologists, and neuroscientists. The book I wrote was called From Fear to Freedom, A Journey from Within to Live Your Best Life. And when my editor read it, she's like, this is amazing, but we were just getting out of COVID. And I'd written it in the midst of COVID. She said, I have a better title for you because what you've really written about is happiness. And then I discovered the whole field of happiness. And I was like, yeah. And I'm glad I did, because number one, pursuing happiness would have probably made me unhappier. And second, if I had really looked into the field of happiness, I would have said, oh my God, 10,000 books. Why do I need to write another book? I would never have written it. But there are not that many books that actually talk about the human condition and our hardwiring for fear and how the keys to our own happiness and joyful state of being are all within us and available to us. We don't need to seek it out there.
I love that. That is so fantastic. There are so many people that are unhappy. And I think that's where a whole lot of, especially in our country now, where all of this divisiveness and garbage that's going on, I think it's because people can't see what's right in front of them.
Yeah, it goes, I think, Emily, even deeper than that. And I've been thinking about this and I wrote about this. In fact, it's the opposite of the work that we're doing, it's the program. But here's my provocation to your listeners. Think about how you have made unhappiness your habit. How have you made unhappiness your habit? Because go back to when you were a child. Go back to when you were 3, 4, or 5. And even better, if you don't remember it, if you have a young child or a grandchild, or if it's not yours, it's your neighbor's child, go watch them. Go watch them for 10 minutes. And what you will notice is nobody needs to teach a child to be happy. Children need something to happen for them to be unhappy. They have to be hungry, they have to be thirsty. I wet my diaper, I fell down and I hurt myself. But my otherwise state is one of joy, of smile, of laughing. I also, as a child, am always present, engrossed for hours in this magical world of trains and playing stories. We play. We make friends, right? We connect. So as children, we have it. And then we grow up and we now all of a sudden are not joyful, but we chase joy from high to high. Something needs to happen to make me happy. I get promoted, I fall in love, I win the lottery, somebody compliments me. But my otherwise state is not one of joy. It's actually a feeling anxious, busy, stressed. What do I need to go do next? Overwhelmed. That's the state. Or I have a state of I'm okay. How are you? I'm okay. Well, it should be more than okay. There is no generation that has ever lived that has the luxuries that our necessities, what we have in our day-to-day used to be luxuries only 100 years ago, right? I think what's happened is we've made unhappiness a habit. And I'll give you an example of what do you mean that we've made unhappiness a habit? Think about 25 years ago. How many people in the world woke up and the first thing they did, if they're working, is looked at their phone and the emails that came in? Right? We know from all the research, when you wake up, that moment between unconsciousness to consciousness is this beautiful period where we have access. We have access to a much deeper sense of where intuition, creativity, possibility. And what do? We've made a habit of letting all the stressors of the world enter our head in that moment. So we've made it a habit. We've made a habit of giving away our state of I've just woken up into now I'm going to start worrying. I'll give you another example, Emily. 20 years ago, if you stood at a queue, right? You and I were standing, we were outside Six Flags or, we were waiting for an elevator to go up. Would we see people on phones? No. But now, even if I'm waiting for 2 minutes at a traffic light, I pick up my phone to say, hey, what came in? Or what's happening? Right? So we've made a habit. We've made a habit of not being present. We've trained our brain to always be wandering and looking for stimulus. And if I can't find it out there, I'll find it in here. And I go to my past or I get anxious about my future. Think about this. We have made habits that are making us unhappy. 20 years ago, I could look at my neighbor. We've always looked at neighbors, even prehistoric times. His cave was bigger than mine. That means he has higher propensity of finding a mate and procreating, and I'm going to be screwed. That went to I can look at my neighbor. Today, we can look at the whole world and live and find their perfect lives and feel sorry for ourselves. Even though their perfect lives on Instagram are fake. It's the perfect moments. It's not the reality. So in every domain, we've made unhappiness a habit. We've given away our power to connect back to that deep state of joyfulness that we all can enjoy.
I am so impressed with what you're saying because it's the truth. It's where we really are. I know in my situation, I love watching babies laugh, kids play. That's just so neat. And I'm sure I was happy when I was that age, but then I got to be kind of quiet after that and more of an observer than a participator in life. As I went on, I kept thinking, oh, if only I had this, or if only I could do that, then I'd be happy, or then I'd be complete, or whatever it was. And I eventually reached all those if onlys. And every time I'd reach another one, I'd go, well, what is it I'm missing? What else is it that I need to get there? After Shock died, when my husband died, I wasn't there. I couldn't even consider the concept of happiness. I didn't know what to do with that. And so instead of trying to work with that, what I did was just shut down essentially and observe. And then I did get married again. I was surprised that I got married again. And he died. But I learned a lot while I was married to him about really what's important and what I already had. Because you're always seeking something else, but I realized how much I already had. And when he died, I started writing in my journal. And I hadn't been doing that consistently. But once I started doing that, as you said, first thing in the morning, when I first wake up, that's the first thing I do. I don't do anything else before I write in my journal. And I'm just astounded at some of the things that come out and the guidance and how much happier. I tell people now that I'm happier now than I ever have been. And there you go, well, how could that be? You had two husbands. I said, and I'm happier now than I ever have been because I've recognized all that. And I love what you're saying.
Yeah, it's beautiful that you have a journaling practice in the morning. Some of my best ideas, I actually consciously, even when I wake up, let myself lie in bed for 5 minutes and just let whatever come. And some of the best ideas, those things that are not linear thinking, but non-linear creative thinking, they come to you as inspirations, as ideas, right? And then I always meditate in the morning. So for us, for the work I'm doing, Emily, I recognize that people are incredibly busy. And I also recognize that, as I said, knowingly and unknowingly, we have made unhappiness a habit. And so all the work that we're doing now, the work that I'm doing now, we've actually built a program. I realize most of what we do is habit-based, right? We are habit-driven. Conscious things that we make habits out of, 40% of our happiness can come from that. We can fundamentally increase, but only if we make them habits. So we designed a program, it's called Rewire, which literally uses the science of habit formation to help people build new habits and literally rewire their brains. So when I went into that, I'm like, if we can do that, then that has a chance because consciously people will go to their reactive structures and their habits, which are hurting them. So we said, look, so how would we do that? So what I did was I literally took my 9-part sunflower model, the 9 practices. And for every practice, I said, what if we could create 5-minute practices? So we created 32 of them across those 9. And they're all 5 minutes or less. Right? This is from the work of BJ Fogg, Tiny Habits. If you make something small, we don't have to rely on our motivation to do it. And what we really need to do is to do what we do. The amount we do doesn't matter because it's repetition that makes neurons fire together and wire together. And so we built these 32 of them that were 5 minutes or less. So anybody has 5 minutes. And we even, some of the practices break them into 5 1-minutes. Everybody's got a minute. The second thing we did is I realized that most people are so busy and consumed by work, they have no time outside of work. And so we said, well, what if we made every one of them be something that just is what they do already? So the concept in habit formation is anchoring. Tie something new to what you already do. So you work all day. So we made 80% of them about what they do at work. And we didn't even want them to do something new. We wanted them to do something they already do, but do it differently. So, for example, we get together on Zoom in a meeting. We've had other meetings we're coming in from, right? And we are gathering, and people are like, hey, let's wait. People are gathering. How are you? Oh, wonderful. Somebody's lost. We said, let's start every meeting with 1 mindful minute. We are already waiting, doing nothing. What if we took 6 breaths together before we started? 1, I stopped thinking about the old meeting because I created a break. 2, I gave my parasympathetic system a chance to catch up to my sympathetic. I'm calmer. 3, because I'm calmer, I've increased my spaciousness to really have the difficult conversations versus run on triggers. So we made them be about things that people do at work already. So if we do them that way, higher chances that people will do it every day. And 3, we said, look, the wisdom of sanghas, of communities of practice, has been there forever. That's why churches, we show up. It's a practice with others. When we do running, we join clubs, group classes, highest chances of people showing up. We said, there are natural teams and communities at work, our teams. So what if we did it together? What if we actually supported each other, inspired each other, held each other accountable? It's not so hard to change our life back to that joyful state that we all knew. Because for doing this, we don't need to do more. We need to go back. We need to rewire. It's a journey back home. It's a journey from within. And it is something we control 100%. Versus the outside world, we control nothing.
I love how you're putting it in perspective of what we are already doing, because if you tell somebody, here, I've got this great thing that you can do, they go, I don't have any time. But where you're fitting it in, where it already is, that's brilliant.
Yeah, it has to be that way. I tell people, look, how many people believe meditation is good? 80% of people will say, I know it by now. How many of them meditate? Only 20%. And you ask the rest, why don't you meditate? They're like, I don't have time, or I don't know how to do it. So when people say, I don't have time, what is meditation? Meditation really is a way to practice mindfulness. What is mindfulness? Mindfulness is the awareness that arises when we pay attention on the present moment without judgment. John Kabat-Zinn, beautiful definition that we can work with, right? So awareness that arises by paying attention on the present moment without judgment. So what is something we're doing moment to moment from the first time, first birth, first breath to the last breath is breathe, right? Breath is a constant. So I invite people, you say, I have no time to be mindful, but you're breathing. Why don't you just focus on your breath for a minute? You don't have to do anything. If you're washing dishes, just be with the sensation of washing dishes. If you're on a call, be with the sensation. Really be present. Don't be on a call and be texting. You eat food, just for a minute, be with the food. Take in the colors, the flavors, the smell, the texture. Just take it all in. We can practice this moment to moment to moment. Of course, it'll be wonderful if we had a sitting practice, but if you don't have time for that, it's okay. Bring the power of mindfulness in whatever you do. But we have to choose to orient to that, and we have to choose to experiment with that, because only when the fruit is sweet in our own mouth will we do it.
That's right. It's all about choice.
It is all about choice. And I love your work, Emily, right? Because I think you're explicitly taking two polarities in people's mind and making it not a polarity. Because grief is an emotion. Grief can also be a mood if it gets stuck and we wake up feeling that way, right? Grief at the loss of somebody you love is definitely an emotion. But when it gets stuck and we can't move forward, it becomes a mood. And I might wake up sad. It's been many years and I'm still sad. Everybody has their own time and process to work through that. But oftentimes people feel, that's why when I first came to know you, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. You're explicitly taking on the point that, hey, first of all, don't feel guilty if you heard a joke and you're grieving and you felt like laughing.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. Our brains aren't single slot instruments where the only thing that can be present is one emotion. We can experience multiple emotions at the same time. Similar to grief and happiness, I can experience anger and compassion at the same time for the same person, right? It's possible.
Mm-hmm.
I can experience fear and I can fear unbelievable kind of excitement to do something at the same time. And so I love that you've decided to tackle, oftentimes grief like is meant to be, everybody wants to stay away from it. Nobody wants to talk about it because they don't know how to talk about it. And so I actually love that, in your own work and in what you're trying to do, you're really trying to get people to like step out of polarities, see it in full dimensional colors. Yes, if the color of grief is black, that is just one out of the color of life that is constantly in front of us. So you can choose to just sit in that, but you can also choose to experience the life in its full, beautiful hues that it gives us.
That's such a perfect way of describing it. And I love how you get what I do because it's so important for people to be able to see that, to see beyond what seems to be like a veil, that if they can lift that veil and see that there's something beyond that, then they can start to move forward, and they can always move forward. People keep thinking they have to get over grief. And I don't think you get over grief. I think you move forward. It's not going anywhere, but you can move forward and you can enjoy all those other things.
Yeah. I mean, I almost think about it, Emily, as rings of a tree. Both the good experiences, bad experiences that we call them, grief, things that kind of bring us to our knees, but we move forward. They might not be grief associated with it, but anger because I got mistreated, whatever it is, right? Traumas, they're like rings of a tree. They never really go away. So I think this whole thing of, oh, we'll heal your trauma is bullshit. No, you don't. It never goes away. You learn how to work with it and use that as a way to grow from it. Just like a tree, it'll always be there, but nothing stops it. You can choose yourself to stop growing from that. No, I love it. I mean, it's you. I don't think you ever get over grief, but you learn to make it a part. And really, if I go back to all of the beautiful work of Viktor Frankl, by giving meaning to suffering, by giving meaning to that moment, right? And I remember this beautiful story that he was talking about. It was about a patient who had come to him and he was older and his wife had died. And he was describing, and he said, I have lost all will to live. My life was her. Like, she was my life. Now she's not here. And I don't know. And he also had a lot of like, I don't know how she could do this to me. We said we were going to be together and now she's died. And he asked her, would you have replaced yourself with her? That you died and she was alive, right? Or this notion of what did you do for her that you wouldn't have been able to do if this wasn't the case? And it completely reoriented that man's perspective. We give meaning. We give meaning. One of my friends, Nicholas Shaw, I got to know him. I didn't know him when I was at McKinsey, but I got to know afterwards. He was skiing down in Utah and we had him on our podcast. So, for your listeners, if they want to check out Happiness Squad podcast, Nicholas Shaw, he had a 7-year-old and he's like an expert skier and the son is an expert skier. They just bombed down double diamonds and like it was the ride of his life. And they were just coming down, Emily, literally a catwalk. Nick was ahead, the son was behind, and a skier just crossed Nick and said, hey, was that your son who just went off the catwalk? And Nick was like, what? And he stopped and he went up and he couldn't find him. William had fallen in this freak accident down this plunge hole and he had died instantly. And to be able to process through that, especially think about the amount of blame and like it was under his watch, he was behind him. But, he chose to give meaning to that. And he and his wife have grown through that. They have 2 other beautiful children. He started a foundation and his whole work is around helping people reorient. And he says is what would Willie do? this notion of like, what would he want me to be? And there's so many of these beautiful stories. So to all those who are dealing with grief now, it's not about overcoming grief, but I think honoring the departed or whatever you're grieving by giving it meaning, using that to become something bigger, even if nothing else, to connect with others, because for the first time through that suffering, you know what it is like because you're not alone to have suffered that loss. There are so many others who are suffering that.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I actually interviewed him on my podcast too.
Nick?
And
Yeah,
Nick. He's amazing. And I've run into so many people as I've been doing this work that have done something just like that. They've started a foundation. They've done something that keeps things in perspective for them, that allows them to move forward in a way they wouldn't have if they were just allowed themselves to be stuck in that grief. So I love Viktor Frankl's work. I think everybody should read Man's Search for Meaning. It should just be required reading because it's just profound. You know, if he can experience what he experienced and come out on the other side and make the difference he has in the world, wow, we all can.
yeah, it's about choice. What is the choice we want to make? Do we want to feel like a victim and feel that the suffering was meaningless? Or do we want to give it meaning through the actions we choose to take? Heal ourselves to heal others, support others. It is what it is. I'm a big, huge fan of Khalil Gibran. And I don't know if you've read his Prophet and on joy and suffering. And he talks about those two elements together too, which is the higher you suffer, the more is your capacity to hold joy.
Yes. Boy, it's something we should all consider and think about. I am so impressed with you and what you're doing, and I'm hoping that everybody's going to be checking you out because there's so much that I can see that you're giving that can change lives, really.
Yeah, listen, for your listeners, here's a gift, because really this part of my life, Emily, is all about how can I help? We set a goal for ourselves when I left McKinsey, right? Because it was in a way very easy decision, but for many people who looked outside in, it was very hard. They're like, how could you do that? You left a 7-figure salary at the top firm where you were at your best. Why would you go to a startup? Why are you starting this movement? It doesn't make any sense. It made sense to me because, it got back to my purpose, my work, when I realized that, look, the world in which we are living in, we are getting more and more hardwired for fear. And from that place of fear and scarcity, we are taking decisions that are suboptimal for the planet, for other humans, and for every other sentient being. And if we have a shot at changing it and leaving a planet for our children, we have to work on ourselves. And so we set a goal. We said, listen, how can we help 1 billion people rewire?
Wow, great
That's
goal.
the goal, right? How do we get 1 billion people to rewire and become more than human? Become more than human, because humanness, what we call humans, is, I don't think we should want to be human, which will be very jarring for many people. They'll be like, what do you mean we don't want to be human? Because everybody wants, everybody talks about being more human, right? We should be more human. We should be more human because we hold human as the highest form. And I'm like, why would you want to be more human? Because if we talk about human, this is the state of humanness, Emily, right? Neuroscientists and evolutionary biologists will tell us that 100% evidence-based, grounded. Our brains have evolved to keep us safe, not happy. That is human. Our brains are wired for safety. It has a negativity bias. And because it's grown in an environment all through our evolution where physical threats were all around us, and 9 out of 10 of them would have killed us. So I would rather you be safe to find joy another day than to be joyful. Okay? That's human. Think about the world in which this human is navigating right now. We don't have lions and tigers roaming around. We are not always at the brink of starvation because we have to go hunting for food or gathering berries. It's literally at the local store. I can call and get whatever I want, more than enough calories for a day. But what do I have? I'm surrounded by an environment where there are psychological threats all day long. The news is constantly telling us everything that's going wrong in the world. Social media is always showing us how we are not enough. So we have enough psychological threats all around us, much more, except 9 out of the 10 psychological threats don't kill us. In fact, they never even come to be. But our reaction of our bodies to psychological threats is the same as that to physical threats. So we are constantly in a state of overreaction. We are swimming in adrenaline and cortisol, cowering and becoming more and more fearful. So I don't want people to be more human. I want them to be more than human, which is let's take control and evolve to that place where we can thrive in this complex, volatile world that we are living in. That's rewire, and we can all do it. So here's a gift for your listeners. We're just updating our website. So by end of next week, we will have it up, and we'll have a section there called happinessquad.com/gifts. And if they go there, they can download a routine that has a set of habits that have made a big difference for me. We'll also put in there a couple of workbooks from the micro habits that are some of the most powerful ones that they can download and start to practice right away. And I leave the first chapter of my book there for them to download as well if they want to get familiar with the practices and what this is all about. Because really, it's my hope that people listen to this, but don't just listen to it. Because knowing is not doing us any favors. We have more knowledge, but we are parched for practice. So even if they took the 2 practices that I'm going to leave there and put it, I think that would be mission accomplished because they would have put something into practice versus one more piece of knowledge in their head.
That is such a beautiful gift. I will put the link to that in our show notes. So everybody who's listening to this, make sure you go to that link and get this gift. It's just amazing. I'm sure it would be life-changing for you to use. Thank you, Ashish. I just can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this conversation. You're just brilliant, such a light in the world, and I'm so grateful that you came on my podcast.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you for the beautiful work that you're doing. It's such a pleasure. I think we need so much more of you, me, and others. And so it's my pleasure. Thank you for being you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, listeners, for listening to this and to listening to my podcast. I'm just all about ways to have you be able to experience happiness to your best life. Please keep joining us and following Ashish as well as us. And I hope to see you again next week.
Do you want more comfort and support and happiness? Join the Grief and Happiness Alliance at our free gatherings on Zoom every Sunday. Visit my website at griefandhappiness.com and read my books, The Grief and Happiness Handbook, and get your set of the beautiful Grief and Happiness cards. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast, rate it, review it, and binge listen to all of our episodes. I can't wait to welcome you back to another episode of the Grief and Happiness Podcast.